What comes to mind as being something you might want to double click into, as they say?
I mean, the succession planning and talent development's a big area. We're really seeing a lot of fundamental skill fracturing, right? Where we need to get younger people into the industry. Part of our challenge in succession planning right now is that not only lack a bench, we lack people who are interested in warming the bench to learn the business to be able to come off the bench in a few years, right? So the expectations game is one that we're losing pretty dramatically. And if we're going to address that, we have to rethink the way that we do talent development by starting much earlier. We need banking to be thought of as a career that's accessible, that doesn't require a huge amount of college debt or this super long pathway to entry. Yeah. That's something that a high school graduate with the proper skills and training could walk into day one and start their career.
Do you think that compensation is a factor, like a deterring factor? Is there a perception that entry-level jobs in banking just don't pay well and so it's not of interest?
That's definitely a challenge that we face.
Yeah.
I think.
Is it true?
It depends.
Yeah.
There are some institutions that I think have focused on that. I'll use one of the large national banks because they made headlines over this. Bank of America, decided to make floor of their sort of entry-level employment be $25 an hour. That's a choice that they made, recognizing that compensation is indeed a problem. The difficulty there is that a large bank like B of A can subsidize a smaller market with that same level of wage or something commensurate for that market with their larger market activities. A community bank doesn't necessarily have that same flexibility. So the flip side of that, though, is that there are a lot of less tangible elements of compensation that aren't immediately apparent from the outside, but once you're in it, actually do make a meaningful difference. And you could put a price on them. People often don't. I'll use...
Yeah, I'm looking for an example.
I'll use work-life balance as an example. Banking is the ultimate, you leave your work at work kind of industry. You can't really take it with you. Mm-hmm. I mean, if you're in a sales role or marketing or something, okay, sure. But from an entry-level standpoint, if you're working as a personal banker, if you're working as a teller, a universal banker, any of those types of customer-facing roles, 5 o'clock rolls around and you're done for the day. And you really can truly leave it at work. That's becoming rarer and rarer these days, and it's hard to put a price on the ability to truly unplug. But there's value.
So are we going back to banker's hours? Like banker's hours is a thing?
Banker's hours is absolutely a thing.
Before we go further, let me introduce Duncan, which is, old friends, longtime friends. So here we go. We sit down and we just dive right in.
That's right.
Duncan Taylor, CEO of the Washington Bankers Association, and as I said, longtime friend.
Yes, sir.
Really glad to have you here for this conversation.
Thank you, and likewise.
We can just pick right up where we left off, but I didn't want to go too far. So we're talking about the succession planning, the future of the industry from a personnel perspective in banking. And for background, some people would know I was a banker for 25 years, which is how we met. And this notion of banker's hours. So it used to be, and I'll say in the 60s for sure, I don't know how long this lasted, but banks would close down at 3 o'clock in the afternoon.
Right.
And that would be to allow the staff those extra hours to do the accounting work that was done on paper.
That's right.
So
it wasn't ledger-based.
It wasn't as though the bank, they were done with their day at 3, but they were done serving clients because there was work to do in the back office. One of the benefits of being a banker is banker's hours, leaving work at work.
Yes.
You saying this to me now is the first time I've had, I'd say, awareness or visibility into that, living the life that I do as an entrepreneur. People would ask, what hours do you work? And I'd say all of them.
Right. How many you got?
It's the life I chose.
That's right.
It's the life I chose. That benefit has value, as you say. Not monetary value, but lifestyle value.
Yeah.
When you said work-life balance, I thought to myself, later in my career, I enjoyed the benefit of lots of PTO.
Right.
Standard in the industry when I was a senior vice president for 4 weeks of PTO. Mm-hmm. At that time, I think there were 10 paid federal holidays. Maybe now there's 11 or 12.
13.
You take 20 days of PTO and 13 days. You're getting close to 3 months when you're not working.
Right.
You're being paid for it.
By work week, right.
Very interesting.
Yeah, and I think that this is one of the hard things. I'll say this as an elder millennial who has a Gen Z son. My observation is that a lot of modern youth perception is very internet driven.
Yeah.
Right. It's what they see on either social media or on aggregator sites like Reddit. And the problem with that is that it creates what I would describe as a flat experience, right? A screen-based experience is flat. There's no nuance.
Yeah.
There's no depth to it. There's no sensibility or feeling. It's just whatever you see, right? And if your reality becomes shaped by that, the dramatic tendency to oversimplify manifests and becomes part of your sort of baseline, what is, quote, normal, right? And so what I observe in online spaces where frequently these types of conversations are carried out is that flattening and oversimplification, where it's all or nothing. It's, everything is either this or that. There's no nuance or in between. The challenge we're experiencing in the industry is that perception has taken such deep root in the minds of 16, 17, 18-year-olds who are finishing high school thinking about what comes next, that you have to actually combat it before you can get to a baseline of 0 to talk about what a real job might look like.
You just put words around a thought that I've had, and it's that flat experience, the binary this or that, but an oversimplification. I was reading some content on the benefits of using Claude to aggregate a bunch of data and simplify it down. And there's this running joke that is becoming more and more mainstream, which is I will have my AI condense your long report into 10 bullet points, and then I'll have my AI take those 10 bullet points and create a long report. We're flattening data and expanding data and flattening data, but when an entire book is condensed down to just the Reader's Digest, just those the Blinkist version of an audio book.
Absolutely.
You miss the context. You miss the nuance.
That's right.
And there's a real there to the human existence.
100%.
And that entry-level job in the bank where people do come in and you're sitting, eyeball to eyeball with another human being, and you're discussing their financial needs and their future, that experience is incredibly valuable for the person, for the banker.
Absolutely.
Right? If I think about the 25 years of experience that I had in working in banks and how I apply that experience to my life as an entrepreneur, my role as a father, my role as a steward, understanding finance and seeing the decisions that people made and having coached people through. One of the greatest stories I have from my time as a banker is a young man who made really good money. He was in the trades. He was he would frame concrete foundations. This was in the early 2000s, and he was making $65 an hour.
Yeah,
right?
that's really good money.
Adjust for inflation, he was making really good money, and he had nothing to show for it. He was living paycheck to paycheck. Yeah. I was managing a branch, and he said, "Do you do personal finance coaching?" I'm like, "Well, not really, but let's have a conversation."
Sure.
And 3 months later, because he made a lot of money, he had put enough cash aside to go buy a new used car, cash. He was so proud when he came in to do that, right? Yeah. There's no way I would get that experience in a Reddit chat.
Right.
Like, I'll get the data.
Yes.
I'll get the information. But in the current era, information is a commodity.
100%.
The knowledge, the wisdom, all of this. Okay, so fun conversation about the future of banking, recruiting this next generation, like attracting them into the industry.
I want to share just briefly, because it's easy, for the viewers and listeners to think, well, this is all, of course, this is a result of AI and all the technology advancement over the last 25 years. Of course, we're dealing with these sort of human skill problems, right? Sometimes we call them soft skills, sometimes we call them durable skills, but it's being good at being human. That's fundamentally what it boils down to. We're losing that. And it's easy to say, well, of course, this is all new. The reason why the only thing we know about what Socrates said, being that Plato wrote it down, is that Socrates believed that writing things down would diminish the human experience so much that it would actually be detrimental to humanity to write down his teachings, thoughts, etc. So he only taught via what we call today the Socratic method, specifically because he refused to write things down. So what we're dealing with, it's not new.
Not new.
It's not new. There's nothing new under the sun.
Nothing new under the sun.
But what's unique about the era that we're in right now is the pace. That is genuinely different, right? Communication, even at the mass level, for most of what we would think of as modern human history, right, has at best traveled via speed of messenger. Our brains are still adapting to the ability to communicate in real time over very long distances. Now it's communicating with millions in real time.
It's cognitive overload.
Absolutely.
Right now, this is the thing that I'm observing. in myself and my children and the people that I work with, so much data, so much knowledge that it's short-circuiting the human brain.
Absolutely.
Educating the workforce, I know this is something that you've been passionate about. We connected deeply around the EDP.
Yes.
The Executive Development Program.
That's right.
I wish I had a copy of Issues and Answers. Because, in 2010, I was on this committee that came together to develop the Executive Development Program.
That's right.
My claim to fame, the only contribution I made was the name, Executive Development Program. That program not only exists today, but it's thriving.
It is.
And elements of it there are offshoots of it. This is, a lot of your passion, a lot of your work has been bringing education. So let's talk about that a bit. What have you done and what are you doing in that space of educating the next generation of bankers?
I appreciate that question because not only are you right that it's a passion of mine, but I also feel like if there is one thing to point to as a path forward for how do we make things better than what we're experiencing today, education is the cornerstone of it, right? Whatever it is, I don't think that there's any singular thing, but I think that education is the cornerstone of all of the things that need to happen for our industry to thrive and succeed into the future. So, the Executive Development Program became a model, became a structure that we replicated in other discipline-specific mechanisms. So we added what is now defunct, but we added a small business banker development program. That got rolled into what we now call the retail branch manager development program. We have the credit analyst and commercial lending development program. So we sort of took some of the disciplines that lent themselves really well to an intensive training process and took the executive development model and kind of plugged them into those disciplines. But then in about 2019, after a significant amount of conversation with the executives that comprised our board and membership, we learned that there was a major knowledge gap in the fundamentals, the nuts and bolts of how banking really works. How does a bank make money?
Yep.
How does a bank function? And why a bank and not something else, right?
Yep.
And so we recognized that there was a need to teach this, and we looked at the landscape of all the options out there. And there were programs and classes that dealt with the material, but nothing that accomplished what we felt was really necessary in that space, which is experiential learning. Mm-hmm. It's the Maya Angelou quote, people will forget what you said, but remember how you made them feel. We need people to feel a certain kind of way about their role in banking, whatever their specific job is.
Yeah.
So we recognized there was an opportunity to build a program around that, and that became what we call today Understanding Bank Performance, which is a class that I have the privilege of teaching. We run that class in 37 states virtually. We run it 4 times a year. And it has transformed the way that we think of educating, especially frontline customer-facing bankers. What's cool about Understanding Bank Performance is that unlike our other programs that are really aimed at specific segments and disciplines, UBP cuts across the board. So we've run UBP that have had students in that are just starting their career, that have 35 years of experience. We've had CEOs, we've had executive assistants. We've had folks on the lending side, on the credit side, the operations side, the compliance side, the IT side, the HR side, and any other discipline you can think of.
And you said it's virtual.
Right.
How long, how many days?
Yeah, it's 16 hours total of content, 8 learning sessions, 2 hours apiece. We run it 4 weeks at a time, 2 days a week. All the sessions are recorded so the students can watch any sessions they missed or rewatch if they want to dive in deeper. But what we found in the feedback, the number one word that shows up in the word cloud from student feedback is fun.
Huh.
Yeah. Put Understanding Bank Performance and fun together and try and figure that one out. But that's the nut that we've cracked.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, that's good.
We've said this is actually a pretty magical business when you think about it, because what banking is, it's not about dollars and cents. It's about people and dreams, right? Yeah. And what banking does, what we do as an industry is you come in as a customer or client with a vision in your mind of a future that you want, not sometime, but today.
Yeah.
And we say, okay, here's the paperwork. We've got the finances worked out. We can make this deal work. We literally grab your vision from your mind and pull it forward into reality today. Yeah. And we do it through the power of financial leverage. Now, I describe that to every student who goes through one of my classes as magic. I know of no other way to describe it.
So compelling. And it's so true. The importance of the financial financial institutions, banks, the importance of banks in our economy, from my opinion, cannot be overstated. Like there's no way.
Absolutely.
And I can point to a couple dozen blessings in my life. If I use that word, I don't use it sparingly. I do use it sparingly. A blessing in my life.
Yeah.
Growth of our business.
Sure.
Buying the building that we were once renting.
Right.
Taking control of our current and our future.
Yeah.
Here's a story that I love. My first bank job, I was 17 years old.
Right.
On my 18th birthday, one of my colleagues said, have a seat. Here's a pen. Sign this. I was like, oh, what is this? She said, it's your IRA. My IRA. And I knew what an IRA was because I'd been given some training. And I said, Lisa, I'm 18. I can't even afford this. And she said something along the lines of, shut up, kid, sign it. Right? Yeah. Lovingly, you know. And she said, what you're going to do, you get paid every 2 weeks, right? Or on the 1st and the 15th. I said, yeah. She goes, you're going to put $25 out of every paycheck into your IRA.
It's amazing.
Yep.
I love it.
So then I went home and I told my roommate, I'm like, at 18 years old, I probably was like, bro, I don't know what this thing is, but I just did this. And he's like, well, what is it? I'm like, I don't know. It's my retirement. I can put $2,000 a year into it. So I'm doing $50 a month. So he came home 2 or 3 days later. He's like, yeah, I just set mine up and I'm doing $50 every paycheck.
Nice.
And I'm like, 50? Well, let's see. 2,000 divided by that. I'm going to do $83.33. And so we had this one-upsmanship. Now, if it wasn't for Lisa doing that,
right?
If it wasn't for me being in the bank doing that, I would not have the life that I have today.
That's amazing.
It's magic.
It's literally magic.
Yeah. If it wasn't for the loan officer at Savvy Bank at the time, who was an SBA 7A specialist,
right?
Ariana and I would not own our office building. He did magic. Like you just said, took that future and pulled it into the present because he was able to understand our business. He underwrote us on the future of our business.
That's right.
Not just looking back historically, but literally took a chance on us.
That's right.
In a way that is reminiscent of George Bailey.
Mm-hmm.
I said early in my career, I want to be a George Bailey banker. And now we are definitely talking inside baseball. Anybody listening to this is not a banker. But I want to be that George Bailey kind of banker. And that is the magic. Okay.
Well, and I'll just say, I think that what makes George Bailey such a powerful archetype, let's break down It's a Wonderful Life for just a moment, because it happens to be one of my favorite movies.
Me too.
The character of George Bailey is often misunderstood. George Bailey is wildly imperfect. Okay? All throughout the movie, he's an absolute jerk, right? He is sarcastic to his parents, makes fun of his dad for his lifestyle and living. His dad shows nothing but infinite patience and love and respect toward George, and George is just flippant and rude to him, right? Just downright rude. Go back to that dinner scene right before they go off to the dance at the high school, and George is just rude to his dad.
Yeah,
and his dad is just like, oh well, I love my son. It's okay, right? No big deal. So when you watch it with a more critical eye toward the character, you can see the level of imperfection. I mean, the fact that he ends up with Mary is a testament to her kindness and patience. Because he is awful to her in that movie. He is terrible to her.
He took away their honeymoon money.
Right? He took away their honeymoon. Rewind back. When she's they're from having fallen in the pool, and he withholds her robe from her, and the only reason that scene resolves is because the policeman Bert rolls up and says, "Hey, your dad had a stroke." So there's all these moments where Capra shows you the character of George Bailey is imperfect, and that's the point. The whole point of the scene with Potter, when George Bailey is sitting there with the cigar in his hand, contemplating having more money than he could ever possibly dream of, and then realizing what the impact is because the core values that he has, despite his imperfections, are still his guiding star. So he can be imperfect. He doesn't have to do everything right. He doesn't have to even be the best or nicest guy. He lives true to that North Star. That's about the bigger picture of what's best for the community that I serve.
Yeah.
That's the ethos of banking in a nutshell. And to be a George Bailey banker, what does George do for the community that he serves? He educates them. No, Nick, your money's not here, right? It's in Bill's house, right? That whole scene is him helping his community understand what the Bailey Building and Loan actually means to that community, where the money really is. Education, in my opinion, is at the cornerstone of being a George Bailey banker.
I love it. I show that clip in the ALM class in EDP.
Yeah.
And it gives me goosebumps every time.
Right?
Just love it. One of my favorite banks, one of my favorite employers. Pacific Continental Bank out of Eugene, Oregon. They had an orientation where they bring in all the new employees for a 2-day orientation, and a 40-year veteran of the bank, someone who worked there at that one bank for 40 years, would play an abridged version of It's a Wonderful Life. And he would say, you can be George Bailey.
That's amazing.
It was so good. Okay, we've gone future of banking, succession, education. The conversation that is mainstream right now is AI, technology, disruption. The question is not, does AI impact banks? I made the joke earlier, just wait until Anthropic releases Claude Bank.
Right.
It's not that dramatic, but how about this? I actually want to go back 8-ish years. I think that's about the right time frame, maybe 10, but the emergence of fintech.
Yeah.
Fintech coming into the scene. So financial technology companies.
Right.
When fintechs hit the scene, there were many community banks that aligned with or partnered with and did so in ways that didn't work out well. Regulators came in, and in some cases I would think rightfully so, and in other cases I honestly don't know, so I don't have judgment there.
Sure.
But really kind of just put the kibosh on fintech partnerships until we can figure this stuff out. I guess here's a question, legit question. Is AI the same as fintech? How are they different? Where we're at, going into the future. What are you seeing from the industry right now?
So AI is definitely different than fintech. From a regulatory standpoint, from an execution standpoint, for the simple reason that, fintech at its core, and I use that word advisedly here because that's one of the areas that fintech has been trying to make inroads. But fintech at its core is about decoupling a lot of the practices in banking from the underlying tech that drove them for decades, right?
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily that the practice is new. It's making it faster, cheaper, more scalable, reducing friction, those kinds of things, right?
Simple example, online account opening, online loan origination.
Exactly.
Reduces friction because I don't have to drive into a branch.
100%.
Okay.
The reason why I see AI as being different is that banking has actually been using what we are currently calling AI for decades. We just called it machine learning back then.
I love this reframe. Let's keep going.
It really is critical to understand that our decisioning process, for example, in banking, has been dramatically automated since at least the 1990s. From an analytical standpoint, much earlier than that. Mainframe analytics have been around since the 60s and 70s. But you could rarely use that data effectively because distributing it in a way that actually got to the end user in a practicable way for decades was paper, right? Handing really, really big reams of paper to a group of loan officers and wishing them the best of luck. Today, obviously, it's much more streamlined and it's actionable because it's digital.
Yeah.
So that digitization process largely began and took place in the 1990s. And as it progressed, we found that automation was pretty effective. You could use it for a lot of the short, quick decisioning that previously required human effort, freeing up those humans then to focus on decisioning that's more complicated. So we've been doing that for a long time.
Something as simple as small business credit scoring. Low level of sophistication.
Yes.
Machine learning, automation, small business, $150,000 loan line of credit application doesn't go through the same human underwriting. It just runs through an algorithm.
Exactly right.
And there's a decision that comes back.
That's a classic example. And again, it's one that is decades old.
And no one bats an eye at it.
No one bats an eye, and the regulators understand it. So the problem, for me, it starts with a little bit of branding. What are we calling AI? Is it large language models? Because calling those AI is basically like calling Siri AI, right? Yeah. It's not intelligent in the way that we would typically describe intelligence, which is why there's that distinction between AI and AGI, or artificial general intelligence, which we're nowhere near. But setting all that aside for a moment, the way that you can use AI in banking and some of the ways that we're seeing it roll out need never face the customer. And if it doesn't face the customer, you don't face the same regulatory and compliance hurdles that you do for things that do face the customer, which was the major part of the fintech problem, right? The fintech problem is that so much of what we were doing in working these fintech partnerships was aligning to customer-facing roles and activities.
And those fintech partners didn't operate with the same level of regulatory scrutiny.
Exactly right.
They didn't come from decades of being in that regulatory environment where some things are just intuitive. You and I would know, like, no, we can't ask that question.
That's right.
Or we must ask that question.
That's right.
And the fintech partners would think, well, I mean, that's just more friction in the process. Let's avoid that go to it. Yeah.
100%. And conversely, the fintechs would frequently roll things out. They're come from a tech space, which is move fast and break things. Well, when you move fast and break things in banking, regulators get upset, customers get upset.
People lose money.
People lose money. And frankly, the financial framework in the U.S. has friction built into it on purpose to try and slow down the likelihood of nefarious actors being able to access your finances, of mistakes becoming irreversible or uncheckable. And so I think that part of it is a framing problem. And as we take the lessons that we learned from the fintech conversation over, say, 15 years or so, and we apply that to what we're now doing with AI, what I've observed is that, not just for our member banks here in Washington, but I've seen this across the country, is that there's a willingness and an openness to investigate it. There's a hesitancy in how deep to roll it out. It's basically, let's sandbox this, let's see what the use cases really are, let's test it. But we now have the internal nomenclature and wherewithal to be able to do that, in part because of the lessons learned, I think, from the fintech space.
Agreed. Do you see member banks or banks generally leaning into a Microsoft Copilot product because it's big, been around, trusted? Do you see them curious about Anthropic products? Where do you see in using the software tools, the models?
So Copilot's definitely the big gorilla for bank AI use because of its integration in the Microsoft ecosystem. The vast majority of our membership seem to use some version of M365. So the fact that it's built in and kind of baked in there, the fact that you can segregate it from the internet, right? So you can have a truly closed source instance that's just unique to your intranet and doesn't go out to the web for anything. That's a pretty big feature.
That validates my observation and supports why we at One Accord, we're an M365 shop, and I'm putting more resources into Copilot Studio than I am Anthropic or other model. It's challenging. It's more challenging. Copilot Studio is far more cumbersome. But it is a safer environment, I believe. And as we serve our clients, as we serve financial institutions, we must know the tools that they're using. Having said that, Claude's really fun.
Claude's very, very fun. Well, it's interesting to me because what you just touched on is actually sort of the trade-off in a nutshell, right? It's more cumbersome, but it's safer.
That's right.
That's the twin side, right? It's the corollary to good, fast, cheap. Pick two. This is the same concept. And so I think that there's a driving force that I've seen in banking. They want it fast and they want it cheap. It's too subjective for our tastes, in my experience. We'll take good enough to get the job done. That goes actually back to the workforce development conversation, because I do think that all things are somewhat related. The younger folks that want to come into the industry, they've seen the best. They've seen the picture or video or example of what the best looks like, the top of the line, the newest, sexiest. It's never going to be banking. It's never going to be us. We're never going to be on the cutting or bleeding edge. You want to attract a younger workforce who can articulate your products and services to their peers, because that's where your future customers are going to come from. So why a bank and not a credit union or a fintech or Bitcoin or other crypto or all the alternatives that are out there? Why not a prepaid debit card? Why not Green Dot or Bluebird, Amex's product? Why not any of those? Why a bank? And the compelling answer to that runs the gamut.
It does.
But you have to articulate it to the right audience. And that's where I see this need to attract, recruit, train. And in some ways, we have to teach the younger workforce a different way of thinking than what they've been exposed to. Because our education system doesn't teach how to be a good human. That's not a core skill set. Our durable or soft skills or emotional intelligence, whatever you want to call it, right? That skill set is not baked into our existing education system. That's why we spent the last 20 years talking about social emotional learning in K-12. We wouldn't have had to have that conversation if the system actually was built around it. But it's not. We know that. We understand the consequences of it not being built around that. But to actually address it, you can either break the system and rebuild it, which very, very few seem to have the appetite for, or you can bolt things onto it and hope for the best, which is kind of where we are. So when we look at, what is the use of AI in banking, the frequent sort of low-hanging fruit that people's mind tend to go to are automating things away, right? My AI will talk to the bank's AI and will facilitate, we'll facilitate all the transacting in the background, and I don't need to actually actively do it. My agent will do it for me. What it really boils down to is, how do you think about what your goals are? What's the methodology of thought that goes into dreaming? that's a core part of the human experience, and that's what banks do. Yeah. That's not going to change no matter how automated the process becomes.
The skill development, though, to get there, to be able to imagine with someone and then pull together the resources and structure to pull that dream into the future. I'm just reflecting on how many courses and professional education I was the recipient of.
Yeah.
Countless sales trainings, countless management leadership trainings, from Cousins and Posner to Blanchard to, just pick them all.
Yep.
And today I find myself going back to my books and my resources of yesteryear and looking at situational leadership and how do I bring this now into my firm. I have to ask this question because it's at the core of the work that we do, and it's around strategic planning. And so much of what we've talked about, all of these great ideas, developing the next gen workforce, how do we use AI? The question is, how do you do this without a strategy? And that's a rhetorical question, right? So I just want to lean into the importance of long-range thinking, strategic planning, but then uncover some of the challenges that banks are facing around how do you write a 5-year strategic plan in an environment where things change every 90 days, seemingly, in the world, the expectations coming in. What is a process that works for a bank to set that long-range goal, but manage to, quarterly reporting, particularly, when they're publicly traded and so forth. Broad question, what are your thoughts on strategic planning for financial institutions?
Yeah, well, first of all, I just want to say that I don't think I've ever seen someone verbally bring out a tee, set it up on home plate, place the ball gently, and then just take a big old thwack at it. So kudos, that was well done. Very well played. I think the first part of the answer, and I don't think that there's necessarily a singular answer to this. I think there's enough organizational distinction that there are multiple answers you could apply. But I think conceptually, right, the first segment of the answer is it's about thought process. It's about the approach that you take. We could call it philosophy, but sometimes people are uncomfortable with that word in this context. But it really is true, right? Philosophy is the love of knowledge. And specifically, it's from the Greek word love, like friendship. So it's literally being a friend to knowledge or being friendly with knowledge, right? And so if you think about it from that perspective, I think that's where we have to start. We have to start with what's the philosophy of strategic planning? What are we actually trying to do with a strat plan? Because if the environment is changing so dramatically and so quickly that we can't really apply the tactics, right? If the strategy is what we want to accomplish, the tactics are how do we get there? The how we get there is evolving so rapidly that we fall into a trap of thinking that the what no longer applies. Yeah. And I don't believe that that's true.
It's not,
if we apply the philosophy appropriately. So what do we want to accomplish that's aligned with our mission or our organizational values? I think that's really the cornerstone. That's that first step. And I think far too few organizations are willing to, because they see strat planning as a box they need to check, not necessarily the tool that it can be, the empowering tool that it can be. And if it's run the way that it should be from top to bottom and bottom to top, every individual in that organization has two choices at the end of the strategic plan. They buy in completely and they say, this is exactly how I want to spend my life, not what I want to do for work. We spend way too much at our time at our jobs for it to just be, this is what I'm going to do for work. That is a recipe for immense psychological stress. This is what I want to do with my life. And if it's not that, then I need to find a way out. Or have someone help me find a way out to find that something that's why. And this is another piece that I see. I'm going to sidebar here back to our Reddit conversation. There's a theme called act your wage. So this idea that I'm here for the paycheck. That's the only reason that I'm here.
Oh, yes.
Don't talk to me about anything else. I'm going to do exactly what my job description says and nothing more. The problem with that is that is an extremely flat perspective.
That's right.
And it lives perfectly well on the internet. It sucks in real life because human beings are not in fact flat. Right. And so I think that when you bring that back to the strategic planning conversation, one part that One Accord wants to be aware of is that there is a non-zero percentage of the workforce at the institution for whom you're conducting that strat planning whose perspective is flat. Whose perspective is, I'm going to act my wage. And so the question is, what elements of the strategy need to garner their buy-in, not their buy-in, their enthusiastic, dare I say, cult-like belief in the mission and purpose of the organization as aligned to that strategy? That's, I think, one of the major missing pieces in strat planning is that today it's so heavily top down because the executives are the audience that there's too little conversation about, do you know how many of your employees are actively willing to sabotage you right now? Because I guarantee you the number is not zero.
Yep.
Do you know how many of your employees are just showing up, doing the bare minimum to get their paycheck, and are therefore a drag on your organization's success? Because I guarantee you the number is non-zero.
Yep.
So, we talk about it in org theory, right? You've got that spectrum of nodes, right? You've got your enthusiastic, vocal believers, right? And that's maybe 5 to 10% of your workforce if you're lucky.
Yeah.
And then you got another 20-ish% or so that are good. They're cool. Everything's fine, but they're not necessarily the Kool-Aid drinkers. They're the bulk of your workforce. They're the bulk of your success, right? And then you get into
they're following that 5%. They're
right.
happy to be in there.
100%. Yeah. And then you've got that middle node, which is the folks that are just they could go either way. And in fact, day to day, they probably slide, right?
Yep.
These are not nodes, they're actually overlapping Venn diagrams, right? And so you can move between them even in the course of a day. And then you get your passive resistors and your active resistors. Your passive resistors act their wage. They do the bare minimum to not get fired. They're Peter from Office Space. And then your active resistors are the ones who are either intentionally or through subconscious action sabotaging your business. And again, you're looking at probably 5 to 10% of your workforce.
I want to attract those people that are on this end of the spectrum, those that are serving the Kool-Aid, not just drinking it.
That's right.
And repel those that are disinterested or detracting or, actively. And so that filter also helps the mid-level and senior level managers know what to say yes to and what to say no to.
That's right.
I was speaking with a mid-level leader in a financial services, and he talked to one of the leaders and said, I'd like resource allocation for this project. And the leader said, good, I'm in support of that. 2 weeks later, the leader came back and said, can't do that. And I said to this person that I was talking, well, clearly you don't have a strategy. Because if at the top level and down that strategy were made clear, that senior leader would have known instantly, yes, we can or no, we can't.
That's right.
And then in the same organization, they had brought in some new people. It maybe wasn't working well with all of them.
Right.
So here again, if the strategy is not clear and articulate, this is on the human capital side. You use the word tactics, which are not strategy. Strategy is the filter through which we discern which tactics we say yes to and which we say no to. And without that clear strategy, so I get anxious. That's a nice word.
Yeah.
Frustrated, angry when the check the box strategic planning, occurs. And I understand amongst executive teams, not everybody's all the way on the serving Kool-Aid side. And there's a lot of dynamic in executive teams and boards and in community banks to get alignment around these things. But that is the purpose.
Right.
To have alignment around the strategy creates the filter for decisions that are made. And then we go back to Kuzi's and Posner's, right?
That's right.
Kuzi and Posner's, the inspire a shared vision. So top down isn't it. We've got to bring everybody. So we could talk about this for days, but...
Well, but I think that you've hit on the theme that ties back to this whole education conversation, right?
Yeah.
I think part of the reason why the flat experience is so popular and so readily available is because it's easy. It requires no formal thought. It doesn't require any self-examination or consideration of, could I be the problem, right?
Yeah.
Yes, Tay, you are. But the upshot is that because our education system isn't well suited to teaching the human skills, one core human skill, and it's at the core of every executive education program, including our EDP, including Pacific Coast Banking School. Yeah. Go to any senior leadership type program and you'll get this. Introspection, self-reflection, that examination of one's own contributions or lack thereof. How aligned am I to my own organization? And these are questions even as CEOs we still have to ask if we're doing a good job, right? And so I think that thought process piece is the hard part because we don't have an effective mechanism to teach it at scale. It really is like it has been for virtually all of human history, those who kind of awaken to that philosophical approach and consider and reflect and ask themselves the hard questions. And I think that to some extent that's just always going to be a minority of people because it's human nature.
Yeah.
So what we have to do from a leadership perspective is acknowledge that, dare I say, embrace it, and then use our strategic planning process, use the philosophy of our organization to filter for those that are aligned or those who could become aligned. And if they're not aligned yet but could be, it's our job to teach them. It's our job to present and create the space for them to grow into that.
It's a responsibility that the banking industry for decades has stepped up to and delivered on. I'm just reflecting, and this is probably a good closing thought. The banking industry has produced some of our nation's best human beings. Civic perspective, a philanthropic perspective, a community perspective. I think of so many bankers are encouraged to be Rotarians,
right?
Encouraged to participate in chambers of commerce, encouraged to be a part of their community.
Yes.
And sure, there's an old man Potter out there.
Sure.
But that's the minority.
Right.
By a factor of 99 to 1.
Yes.
And the George Baileys are the 99.
Mm-hmm.
And if there was any message that I wish could come out of this conversation is to the next generation, George Bailey is actually the guy. He's the person.
That's right.
That we should look to as a role model of being an imperfect human being that made some good decisions along the way and impacted his community positively.
I couldn't agree more, and I love ending on the note of thinking about George Bailey as a person and the story that his character can help us tell. The pivotal moment in the movie where he realizes what Bedford Falls would look like without him. Just without him. That's the only change that gets made, is without him, and then everything else cascades from it. But what I think is remarkable about that is that the reason why he's on that bridge, willing to end his life, is because he is intimately and deeply aware of his own flaws. He goes there after blowing up at Mary and the kids, making his own children cry.
Yeah.
He has what is, for a father and a husband, the lowest kind of moments you can have. And in his mind, that's out of character for him. Now, I don't actually believe it's out of character for him. I think that the entire movie up until that point tells us this is the kind of thing George Bailey is capable of. He is capable of this kind of moment. And then he has it. And so for us as an audience, we shouldn't be surprised if we're paying attention. We are surprised because it's designed to shock us, but we shouldn't be surprised.
Yeah.
And yet he is surprised by his own. It doesn't match the story he tells himself in his head of who he is as George Bailey. So he goes to that bridge and he's going to end his life, and all he can think of is, I hope my family will be okay. I'm more dead than alive. Understanding that that's what it takes, the willingness to investigate our own worst impulses and behaviors, our willingness to examine ourselves critically, acknowledge and accept all of our flaws and mistakes, and then say, but my values would have me do better.
That's right.
My values, what I believe, and the story I want to tell about myself isn't what I'm doing here today. That concept is what we need to do a much better job of teaching the next generation, because their expectation of perfection, their expectation that if you've ever made a mistake, the classic, somebody makes a tweet on X and they criticize something, and then they get a response in the comments, this you, and it's them having the exact opposite position. Yeah. Maybe they're being a hypocrite, or maybe they grew and they changed and they evolved. I used to be 12. I used to have a lot of stupid thoughts, right?
Yeah.
Don't judge me by the dumbest thing that I've ever thought or said out loud, just because it happens to live forever because of the internet. So I think that there's a confluence of all these themes, right? Mm-hmm. And at the center of it, I think there's what you're trying to do, what we're trying to do, so well aligned that if we're able to execute, if we're able to do it well, we won't see the results of it for 40 years. We'll both be long retired.
Somebody will be sitting under the shade of that tree. So fun, just hanging out with you.
Likewise, my friend.
I am so encouraged, not just for the banks in Washington, for the Washington Bankers Association, but for the industry as a whole. I think your impact across the country is going to be meaningful, profound, and we're lucky to have you, man. Thanks for...
That's incredibly kind. Thank you, my friend.
Thanks for hanging out.
You bet. Appreciate it.